Hi everyone, welcome to today's video. Today we're going to be talking about how to pick a winner property, whether it be your home or an investment. For those of you that haven't met me before, my name is Angela. I started this Money Messenger project as a way of imparting some of my knowledge about all matters relating to money out to you there. My background is in financial planning. I've got 20 years experience as a freelance financial paraplanner. That means I help financial planners to prepare the plans for their clients, which detail recommendations about how to repay debt, grow their wealth, and manage their money better. So in today's video, let's talk about property. This is a viewer question that we're answering. Dwayne asks, regarding housing, how do we find housing that builds and maximizes growth, equity, whilst renting it out? What are the key things we should be looking into to achieve this? Great question, Dwayne, and let me tell you, that is a conversation starter. Let's get started. How to pick a winner property. First thing first, is this going to be your home or is this going to be an investment? They're two very different matters. If it's your home, then picking a property is very personal. It's a lifestyle choice. So it's up to you where you want to buy, where you want to live, where you want to raise your children, that type of thing. It does help to keep investing in the back of your mind, but your desire for a particular lifestyle or affordability will definitely override that. So that really is a personal choice when it comes to buying a home. Ways to get a little bit more oomph out of buying your home are: check the price, buy right. When you make money in property, the first time you make money is when you buy the property. If you overpay, you're already shooting yourself in the foot. So check the price, surrounding households, that type of thing, see what the market's doing, and pay right. Negotiate. Everything in life is negotiable. If you have a fear of losing out, that's when you end up throwing extra money. Always go in with a negotiable price. You never ever know why the seller, what their motivations are to sell. Consider the future. Can you add value to the property? That's a great way of immediately increasing the value. So can you do some basic renovations, lick a paint, maybe change the kitchen, that type of thing. Doesn't have to be structural renovations that'll cost you thousands of dollars and planning in council and that type of thing. Just a lick of paint and some cosmetic touch-ups to the property. Maybe the front of the property could be painted or the garden could be done. Things like that add immediate value to the property, even if it's your home. And think about the future in terms of what can you do to the property, maybe at a later date. Are you buying a property, a home, that's perhaps on some land that one day, maybe a few years from now, you may want to subdivide and sell off the back part of the property, for example. There are ways that you can, although you're buying a home, just consider things in the background as to how you can add value and make money. Because if it is your home, you will likely be there 5 or more years. Most people tend to move around every 4 or 5 years or so or more. So whilst money is not your motivator for a property when it's your home, it does help just to keep things in the background. Let's get into the sticky about investing though. The suburb you live in doesn't always make the best investment. Quite often when I see people in financial planning that have an investment property, it's funnily enough located in the same suburb that they live in. Usually people buy in the suburb they live in purely from a comfort factor. They know the suburb well, they know the streets, they feel comfortable perhaps that they can drive past the property, but doesn't always make the best investment. When investing in property, you need to buy property that is of investment grade. Think about supply and demand. The thing that pushes the value of a property up is if the supply is scarce of what you have, and the desire for what you have, your property, is big enough, that pushes the value up. The less supply there is, the more the demand there is, the more your property price increases. Think about short-term gains, first of all. Let's talk about those. Number one, buy right. Don't overpay. If you overpay, you're already going to be behind the 8 ball. Pay right, negotiate. Even if you end up paying the ticketed price, but you tried to negotiate, at least you tried. It doesn't always work, but remember, you don't know the methods or the motivation for a seller wanting to sell. Particularly if you can find out what their motivation is to sell, that's when you can really go in and negotiate well. The investment climate is changing. Before, you could throw a dart at property in some locations and just wait long enough and your property will go up in value. That's changing of times, I find. You need to be a little bit more strategic in how you pick your property. I'm conservative in nature. I like to have a backup plan for the backup plan. So when I buy a property, I layer the way I can make profit. In other words, I buy right, I add value, and I also think about in the future what I'm going to do. In other words, long-term capital growth. So what I mean by that is, number one, I've purchased right. I've paid an appropriate price for the property, preferably a little bit under market value. Number two, backup plan in case my purchase price was okay, but nothing great. I want to add value to the property. I wouldn't buy a property that I just buy out and rent out to a tenant, because I like to put a little bit of a backup plan in there and create some immediate equity. And that comes with renovating the property. Again, slight cosmetic renovations, a lick of paint, changing doorknobs, decluttering the yard, in other words, making the landscape better. They're all things that you can do to do an immediate renovation on the house. If a house looks tired and the bank drives past to do a valuation, they're not going to give you a great immediate increase in value, are they? So they're the short-term ways to make money with property. Buying right, adding value through renovation. Long-term ways to make money are through capital growth and adding more value. Now, adding more value might mean that you want to subdivide the property, perhaps develop the property, or sell off a portion of the property. Not all property is applicable for that type of strategy, and that's a whole different video that one day we'll get into, I'm sure. In terms of capital growth, once you've purchased your property, once you've done your renovations perhaps, and you've got a tenant in there, now what? You want to make sure that the property is going to go up in value over time. That's what we call capital growth. That depends if you pick right or not. Otherwise, you can be waiting quite a while to get your capital growth. So you want to speed it up, obviously, so that you can then draw down some of that equity potentially and buy a second property. So the ways to pick a property that will increase in capital growth faster: pick blue chip suburbs when possible. I would try and buy the best property you can in the best location you can, in other words, suburb, whenever you can. Whilst there are other cheaper suburbs, in my experience now that I've had properties for 10 years or so, I'm starting to find that properties maybe that aren't in the best of locations can have challenges later on down the track. In other words, they can have a problem with the quality of tenant that goes in, or with a stigma attached to a suburb, for example, which can always cap how much you make from a property. So I would always try and pick more blue chip suburbs, that quality suburbs. Even if they're a little bit more expensive, I would pick the best house in that particular suburb that I could. It may not be the best house in the whole state, but it would be the best one that I could afford in that location. CBD, beach, river. You want to buy properties that are desirable for potential tenants. Think about your target market. Who are you wanting to rent this property out to? That's who you're shopping for, essentially. Properties that are close to water, just over the test of time, they seem to do very well because it's a lifestyle factor. There's usually the limited amount of properties that can be built around those locations because they're already quite built up. So if you pick something around water, it holds its value very well and goes up. When I say CBD, I don't mean inner city, smack bang in the CBD. For me, I prefer properties 5, 6, 7 kilometers out from the CBD. I don't do inner CBD because generally they're only apartments, and I'm not really a fan of high-rise apartments just because there's too much supply and perhaps not enough demand. If you buy a property, an apartment in an apartment complex that has like 100 apartments, and there's a few tenants going in looking for properties, what's going to make your apartment stick out from the other 99 properties in that complex? So I don't tend to like high-rise apartments. I prefer smaller complexes. Apartments are still fine, but smaller boutique complexes, which maybe only have a handful of properties that are located 5, 6, 7, 8, maybe 10, even 15 kilometers out from the CBD, depending on what state you're in. For me, in Perth, I like properties 5, 10 kilometers from the CBD. Here in Melbourne, those properties are very expensive and hard to find. So even a property 15 kilometers out from the CBD can still be a good location. Think about also government spending. Is there any government spending happening in suburbs that you can identify? That might mean new train stations going in, new shopping centres, or even old train stations being done up and remodeled. It could mean maybe there's some shops that are getting a facelift as well, maybe schools that are going in, roads that are being enhanced. Look for where the government's spending the money, and that is often a sign of good things to come. In other words, once that spending is finished, the property values in those certain locations can definitely increase. And look for gentrification. That means ugly duckling suburbs. Before I said invest in suburbs, the best one that you can, the nicer suburb that you can invest in. Sometimes affordability is a problem. So you may not always have the option of investing into a particular suburb. But for me, when I started in my property investing, I picked ugly duckling suburbs, I call them. Suburbs which weren't the best to start with, still very close to the CBD, but just little pockets of suburbs that people seem to have not cottoned on yet that were desirable. In other words, still close to the city, but maybe the government or other private property developers had just gone in and started to do up shops, maybe change roads. Other developers were in the area just starting to buy blocks, perhaps bulldoze them, build new townhouses, that type of thing. Don't go in when everyone else is already in there and you're at the top of the market. But if you find a suburb that's close to the CBD and other developers are starting to change houses, that can be a good sign of gentrification. Those suburbs can be a fabulous way of making capital growth quite quickly. But the caveat to that, and why I say now I would prefer to invest in a nicer suburb than an ugly duckling one, is if you're going to just buy one or two properties and hold them for the long term. Now in my investing experience, I've found that, like I said, ugly duckling suburbs, whilst they can make good money, fast money, quick, later on come some challenges when it comes to tenant quality or neighbourhood socioeconomic issues, things like that, which does have challenges later on, I have found. So that's why I would prefer now when I buy a property, I would look more so for the nicer suburb that I can, still pay the right price, still add value somehow, but then be left with a property that I want to hold for the long term, which is in a nicer suburb. Versus the ugly duckling suburbs, I think they're better for making money faster initially, but then I'm not so sure if I would want to keep those properties long term. Investing is long term. You need to keep the property. You'll hear a lot of people, if you read the property magazines, things like that, say that properties double every 7 to 10 years. And that's not right, that's not wrong. It depends on the property. But what they mean by that is property cycles take a few years to turn. Australia is not one investment market on its own. You have the Perth market, you have the Melbourne market in different states. So whilst the Perth market is not doing so crash hot, the Eastern States market, Sydney, Melbourne, that type of thing is doing better. So property cycles can take several years to complete. It's not a thing that happens overnight. So by saying to keep your investment property 7 to 10 years, that gives you time to go through 1 or even 2, because you may not necessarily get capital growth, a lot of it in the first few years for some economic purposes or reasons. That may take a few years to kick in. So whilst you've priced right, you've added value, you still need to keep the property long term in order for you to get your capital growth. I'll give you an example. I had a property that I sold just recently here in Victoria. It was actually my first investment property that I'd purchased, and I'd had it for just over 10 years. And when I bought that property, it was a block of land that I then built a house on through a local builder. And that property, I bought right with the block of land. I added value by taking a blank block of land and adding a house. But then for my capital growth to kick in, it happened a little bit in the beginning and then kind of went flat for a few years. And nothing really happened. The rent was going up, but the actual value wasn't. Then all of a sudden, about 4 or 5 years into it, the prices spiked here in Melbourne. Kept the property, just ignored it, because obviously I'm not going to sell it, I'm keeping it long term. I was able to draw down on some of the equity to buy another property, but then left the first property as it was. Another 5 years later, that property then doubled in value again, because property in Melbourne in the last couple of years has definitely had a big boom. So had I sold that property after 1, 2, 3, even 4 years, I probably would have been quite disappointed. I was able to ride out 2 property cycles here in Melbourne and benefit from those. Just a quick comment on buying established versus new builds, because I've had some questions about this come through of late. This is my personal opinion. I am an investor myself. I'm telling you how I invest and what I do. It's not right for everybody, but it's definitely worked for me. So take what I say with a grain of salt. do your own research and find what works for you, but at least you can take what I'm saying as some tips. I prefer to buy established for the most part. That's quicker. There's houses there ready to go, ready to buy. Once you've done your research, they're there. You don't need to wait for a year or so to build the property, which I've also done in the past. You can rent it out straight away. You can add value straight away. You can get your tenant in there quicker, and then you can get the bank to revalue it and potentially go on to your second property. So I prefer established for quicker. By being established, it also means you can go in and do a deal. You can negotiate because the price is there, the property is there, the person wants to sell straight away. So you can negotiate faster as well. And for most times, there's less supply, which means if you're buying in a blue chip area that's not far from the CBD and you like the property that you found, usually you wouldn't pick a place where there's a lot of land available that you can be built out essentially. New properties could be built all around you. That would create too much supply and the demand would go down. But by picking an established property, generally, there'll be houses already built around it. There might be one or two getting knocked down and redeveloped. But for the most part, there's properties all around you. There's no way that they can build you out. The only downfall with established is that properties can be older, meaning new maintenance or more maintenance, and also some depreciation, tax deductions may be less than a new property. When it comes to new build though, a lot of people like that because it's new and fresh. That can be great when you're building your own home. When it comes to investing, it can cause some issues as well. Number one, I find that the time it takes to build the property, I'm not getting any rent, anything like that. I'm still going to be paying interest to the bank, which yes, can be built into your tax deductions and whatnot, but you're not getting your income straight away. People would then think, well, the price is reflective of how long I have to wait for my property. The thing is, if a developer is in there or a builder building your house for you, they're cash flowing that property whilst it takes a year or so to build it. So often with house and land packages, for example, you will find that the price has that interest cost built in from the developer. So ain't nothing for free. The developer doesn't do it just because. They build into the price of the property their costs. So it can be more expensive to buy a house and land package as well. That comes with your house as well. If you're looking for a home, quite often these house and land packages, you know, they're in areas that the government wants you to buy where the urban sprawl is going out. The price may be reflective on that because you're getting told to build further out. But when it comes to investing, I'm not a fan of house and land packages for the most part. The price, to me, they don't seem to be discounted. In fact, they've got the interest costs and whatnot from the builder built into them. If you're buying a house and land package or investing in a new property for investment purposes, they are new, so that means less maintenance, less dramas, less things to go wrong potentially, and greater depreciation, tax deductions. The one negative though, like I mentioned, is the locations. I prefer houses that are closer to the CBDs, and with house and land packages, you'll find they tend to be in outer suburbs these days because the government is allowing developers to build out there because they're trying to spread the urban sprawl. For me, I don't like that when there's land available and everybody else can build a property out there because it increases the supply of houses. And we want to keep the supply of houses down so that when you're looking for a tenant, they come to you and not the 30 other houses that are nearby you. So in summary, when investing and you want to pick a winning property that will earn you capital growth, pay the right price to start with, get your immediate profit. Number two, try and add value, increase the value straight away with a small renovation, cosmetic renovation. And number three, pick the best suburb that you can afford. So one that's close to the CBD, not in the CBD, close to the beach, or close to the river or some other water, for example. Hope you enjoyed this video. Please subscribe to the Money Messenger website, www.moneymessenger.com.au, to be notified of future videos and other bits and pieces that I'll be sharing with you. Thank you everyone for watching today, and I'll see you next Wednesday for our next video. Bye.